no pay controversy, salary increment, and the burden of resolving the lingering strike action by university lecturers are the major issues discussed by the federal government today and university vice chancellors in ending the ASUU strike. Discussing a way to ensure a level playing field for all voters ahead of the 2023 general elections. Hello everyone, welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimale in Abuja. We continue our countdown over the strike action by the university lecturers, which the union has now declared indefinite strike action. It's 205 days since the university lecturers left the classroom down to and are asking the federal government to meet the demands that have been laid before the federal government to resolving what has become a very embarrassing situation. In fact, that forms the basis for our conversation tonight on the program. There was a meeting between the federal government and university lecturers, the federal government being led by the Minister of Education, Mr. Adamu, and we get all of the angles of what was discussed today, and we're seeking the solution and a way forward. Before we get into all of that, let's serve you with some of your political roundup stories. All right, that will come to you in a moment. But let's tell you that ahead of the 2023 general elections, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, has begun a review of the electoral framework for voters in internal displaced persons camps, owing to the passage of the 2022 Electoral Act and the introduction of new technologies. Speaking at a presentation of the 2023 draft guidelines for voters in IDP camps, INEC chairman notes that the idea is to align the framework with the provisions of the new electoral laws and ensure that no citizen is disenfranchised. Some of the proposals in the draft guidelines include the use of beavers in the IDP camps, which must be configured to polling unit level only. Take a listen to the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu.
You may recall that ahead of the 2015 general election, the Commission introduced the idea of voting by internally displaced persons, IDPs. For this reason, a policy and framework designed by the Commission was revised and validated in 2018 for the 2019 general election. Today, the same policy has been revised and is being presented to stakeholders for review and validation ahead of the 2023 general election. The idea is to ensure that no eligible Nigerian is left out of the electoral process on account of displacement, disability, or other circumstances that may limit citizens' participation in the electoral process.
Well, and that's the INEC chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yakubu. Now it's now time for us to serve you with your political roundup stories.
Following the recent defection of Senator Ibrahim Shekarau from the NNPP to the People's Democratic Party, the dust of the defection seems not to have settled, as some members of the NNPP who joined the party alongside Ibrahim Shekarau have pledged their loyalty to the NNPP. Dino Melaye, spokesperson of the Atiku campaign organization, says he is certain that with the defection of the serving senator to their party, Atiku Abubakar of the PDP stands a great chance in getting the numbers for a win ahead of the 2023 polls.
With the coming of Shekarau to the party, this is actually going to cement the victory of PDP in Kano.
Ahead of commencement of the political campaign activities, wife of the former Adamawa State Governor, Zainab Boni Haruna, has asked supporters of the People's Democratic Party in Yobe State to vote for Atiku Abubakar come 2023. Mrs. Boni Haruna, who is an indigene of Yobe State and the coordinator National Mandate Group for Atiku in the state, disclosed this at the inauguration of PDP local government coordinators and stakeholders in Damaturu, the state capital.
My message to PDP in Yobe State is that Atiku Abubakar is the next president of Nigeria.
He's a trained horse. He has been there. He is not somebody that can start thinking of what to do. He will just start running the day he was elected.
The governor of Adamawa State, Umar Fintiri, says it is important to consider what role the judiciary will play in ensuring that the elections are free, fair and credible as the nation heads to the polls next year. The governor made this comment during the swearing-in ceremony of the newly appointed chief judge of the state at the chambers of the government house in Yola, the Adamawa State capital. According to him, for the courts to perform their job effectively, including resolving election-related conflicts, they must be seen to be neutral if the people must have trust, confidence and faith in their judgments.
Judges must function and be seen as officials of the judiciary and not as representatives of the ethnic groups to which they belong.
The national chairman of the National Rescue Movement, Mr. Isaac Chigozie Ude, has been explaining the rationale behind the substitution of the party's presidential candidate ahead of the 2023 general elections. Mr. Chigozie Ude told journalists at a news conference in Abuja that the decision is in line with the party's constitution and it's done to increase its chances of victory in the next general elections.
The decision was taken in good faith to brighten our chances on all the constituencies we are fielding candidates in 2023 general elections.
The Federal High Court sitting in Lagos has granted bail to the Speaker of the Ogun State House of Assembly, Olakunle Oluomo, in a sum of 300 million naira with two sureties in like sum. Justice Daniel Osiago granted bail following no objections from the EFCC. The EFCC had initially arranged the Speaker alongside two other officers of Ogun State House of Assembly before the judge on an 11-count charge of conspiracy, forgery and stealing. The commission alleged, among other things, that they conspired to steal from the Ogun State House of Assembly treasury for a sum of 2,475 million naira. The national women leader of the All Progressives Grand Alliance, Mrs. Adaoji Nwayanwu, has defected to the Labour Party. Mrs. Nwayanwu, in her letter of resignation, says she joined the Labour Party in order to ensure the victory of the party's presidential candidate, Mr. Peter Obi, in the 2023 presidential election. She notes that Obi can transform Nigeria from its current situation. And some civil society organizations have started planning for the 2023 general elections, and their agenda is to create a platform where the civil society community is better coordinated going into the crucial polls. Action Aid, a civil society organization, today put together a symposium on achieving synergy across board.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us right here on the program. If you're being a follower of this program, you will know just how passionate we are here at Channels Television about the issue of the ASUU strike and how some Nigerians are not too happy with the fact that students are being at home for over 200 days because the university lecturers have said until their demands are met by the federal government, they will not go back to work. So we've taken it upon ourselves as a duty, as a media organization with our constitutional right and obligation to ensure that every side on this matter yield to the call of Nigerians, the average Nigerians on the street, those whose children and words and students are affected by these strike action. It's been a very, very worrying situation over the past month. The Labour had held a solidarity rally asking the federal government to yield to the call of the lecturer. At some point, the federal government has spoken up and said, we do not have what it takes to meet up in terms of the financial demands of ASUU. Well, today the federal government has set up a tactical committee to review its no work, no pay stance against striking members of the Academic Staff Union of Universities. This followed a meeting by the Minister of Education, Adamu, with the pro-chancellors and chairmen of councils, as well as the vice-chancellors of universities. The meeting held behind closed doors and was part of the efforts to resolve the 7-month industrial action by lecturers of public universities. The federal government says it cannot afford a 23.5% salary increase for lecturers of all categories except for professors. Let me allow you to listen to the Minister of Education, Mr. Adamu.
Between the unions with a view to finding a solution, an amicable solution to the challenges. After a series of meetings with His Excellency the President and the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Minister of Labour and Productivity, Minister of Communications and Digital Economy, as well as the Director General of the Budget Office and the Chairman, Salaries and Wages Commission, and the Minister of Education, the draft agreement was critically reviewed and the proposed salary increment considered unrealistic by government and out of tune with the realities of the economy. It was at this meeting that Mr. President approved that the Minister of Education should take over the negotiation and resolution of the crisis. And soon after the meeting, the Minister, that is I, conveyed the federal government offered the NIMIC brief committee, and after I had spoken to the committee, I spoke to all the unions separately. The package offered made centered around 4 positions agreed upon by government, and these are the centers. Number 1, that the federal government can only afford a 23.5 salary increase across the board for all categories of the workforce in all federal universities, except for the professorial cadre, which will enjoy a 35% upward review.
Now, that is the Minister of Education basically explaining the stance of the federal government. Now, there are different angles to this conversation tonight. What the federal government says it can afford as far as the salary, upward review of salary of lecturers is involved is one thing on one hand. Whether or not this is sustainable, if there is an increase in the salaries and the wages and allowances of the lecturers, can the federal government sustain? So the question is, if you look at what has happened in the past, our government in the past had this conversation, an agreement with the lecturers, but down that line, the government is not unable to meet up its own obligations of these demands. Now, that on one hand. Another issue here is there is another committee that has been set up. This perhaps is going to be the 3rd committee that has been set up to look into this matter. Don't forget the Babalakin committee, the Professor Biggs committee, and now this one. The federal government is saying this report from this committee will go straight to the president. Well, that's another issue. The no work, no pay scenario and the stance of the federal government, the lecturers are saying that it does not work for us. Where do we go from here? And so tonight we'll have a panel to chew on this matter, and perhaps we're looking for solution, and a lasting one at that. Not one government putting up a solution that will be temporary, and at the end of the day, 2 years down the line, we'll come back to the same situation. I'm being joined by the presidential candidate of the ADP and the chairman, the national chairman of the Committee of Political Parties in Nigeria, Alhaji Yabaji Sani. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Sean.
From the economic point of view, and whether the purse and the pocket of the federal government can afford the demands of ASUU and what the federal government is putting forward, Mr. Muda Yusuf, a former director at the SCCI, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, he joins us virtually from Lagos.
Thank you, Sean. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yusuf, for joining us. And we will also be joined from Benin City by a former chairman of the Benin City University of Benin, ASUU, Professor Julius Inyase. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us. He will be joining us in a moment as soon as we are able to reconcile connection with him. Let's begin the conversation. First and foremost, you will agree with me that this is an unnecessary delay in the lives of the students whose academic activities have been halted for over 200 days. Now, the present stance of the federal government, let's assess it. Alhaji Abajisani, what is your own assessment of the stance of the federal government, another committee that has been set up?
Well, I think this goes to show how committed, the Mr. President's men are really to the cause of developing this country, which must be number one, agenda on any president. I know President Muhammadu Buhari as a person must be really, going some, suffering some pains, because this shouldn't be toyed with at all. If anything at all should be toyed with, it's not education of our children, for God's sake. I mean, education, especially given a country like Nigeria, where we are battling with ignorance and poverty, education must be where the government must focus so that you can even, in fact, we can declare state of emergency in education. My party, if you look at the symbol of our party, we have the book because we believe that education must be it that must be given the utmost attention. And here, since 2014, governments have been promising to develop. I mean, what the ASUU is doing, to me, believe you me, they have been very, very nationalistic. They are fighting for development of education, revitalization of education in this country. Yes, they are fighting for their salaries, but it is not only their salaries they are talking about. And the issue of government saying that no work, no pay is also some kind of double standard, because I understand there's a section of education, the research units, who have been on strike for over 13 months or so now, and they are being paid their salaries. So the ASUU that is demanding that they must pay for the months that they were not at work are right, because which work are they doing since that time? And whose fault is it that they are not at work? It's because government went back on its agreement with them. So I think President Buhari must step up to the plate and really solve this problem as one of the last legacies that he has, veritable legacies that will leave for Nigerians. Because it doesn't make sense. People are saying because some of the elites, their children are not, in the public schools, that's why they're toying with the future of the country as a whole. Because if you don't educate these children, believe you me, the issue of banditry, the issue of this country, catching up with other its peers, believe you me, it will be a dream that will never come true. So, Mr. President is the one elected. These officers, the ministers, and what have you, I'm not sure they're telling Mr. President the truth. A few weeks ago, we heard that Mr. President gave a marching order to the Minister of Education to solve this matter and come back to him within the shortest possible time. Few weeks later, or a few days later, the education minister said Mr. President never gave in that kind of order. Is it wrong for Mr. President to give an order? That would have shown that the president is passionate and is committed to moving the education of our children forward. So it's like we don't understand the role of education, or we understand it, but because it doesn't directly affect us, we are toying with it. So my call is that if for federal government to please, find a way by which we can settle these bills. They talk about 1.1 trillion naira, that is for the revitalization of the education sector. I don't think 1.1 trillion naira is too much. If you look at what even the UN has said, that we must, the percentage of the budget is about 17% minimum that, UN has said that you must reserve. We have a budget of how much? About 19 billion. Now, we're 19 trillion, sorry, we're talking about. So that is less than 10% of even that budget which we want to put. So 1.1 trillion naira in the education sector in Nigeria is never too much to revitalize the sector. And to now say that the unions, you can only pay for the lecturers, the professors, not the other academic staff, to me, it's begging the issue. Fight corruption, for God's sake, so that we can have the revenue that is being stolen, by the government officials, to be plowed into education sector, health sector, and in the even security sector. Look at how we're losing this country. Is the security aspect you want to look at, or the education system you want to look at, and if you want to attack any nation to bring it to its knees, attack its educational system, attack its food production system. All of these sectors have been attacked in a manner that you never believe that is under the president like President Muhammadu Buhari. So my call to Mr. President is to please step in as a father of the nation to solve this problem. Forget about all these rigorous, the rhetorics that they come out. Isn't even a shame that the lecturers will come out and say the government is telling lies, and when you go through what they have said, it's true that government is really economical with what they are saying. So I think the ball is in the court of the federal government, not the ASUU people, really. I really feel for the ASUU, for the lecturers, because we are losing, brain drain in this country.
What about the students? When they say when two elephants fight, the grass suffers.
Exactly what I'm saying. The students are the ones suffering. And
200 days in the life of any person is a total.
There's no serious country that can even afford 1 month, out of school education, for its children education. When we had COVID, look at what the European, nations were doing. They managed by all means to keep the children, to be in school, even if it's online, And look at us. Ours is just a matter of blocking this, the stealing that is going on. The General Federation stole about 100-something billion.
Allegedly. The case is in court.
The case is in court.
Allegedly.
The 90 report comes out till $4-something billion has been stolen in that sector of the economy. So what is wrong? Why don't you find that who is stealing this money and then plow it back? How much are we talking about for God's sake?
Let me bring in Mr. Muda Yusuf. Let's see if we can get some financial and the economic angle to this. First and foremost, Mr. Yusuf, you understand the economics and the pockets of the federal government. So first and foremost, I'd like to know, is it true that the government cannot afford the demands, financial demands from ASUU?
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening to all our viewers. There is no doubt that the federal government is facing a major fiscal crisis. We saw the reports that was presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance about 2 months ago or so, which stated clearly that the fiscal position is so bad that what we have paid on servicing debt is far more than the revenue that was realized. And the implication of that is that the funding of our personnel costs, of our capital projects, of our the current overhead expenses, fuel subsidy and all of that will have to come from borrowing. So the economy itself, or the government itself, is on the verge of bankruptcy. How we got to that position is a different matter. But that is the reality that is on the ground. Now, we just have the presentation of the MTF, the medium-term expenditure framework. And given the two scenarios that were presented for 2023, we are looking at a deficit of 12.4 trillion under the first scenario. And the first scenario is about full payment for subsidy for the whole year. And a deficit of 11.3 trillion for the second scenario, which is paying subsidy up to half of the year. Now, from that projection, we are looking at a revenue of about 8.4 trillion. Again, that's an indication that the outlook is extremely gloomy. That is not to excuse the federal government from discharging its basic responsibilities to ASUU and all of that. But in matters like this, there is need to be a shift on both sides in the light of this reality. To restructure the government spending and all of that, that will take maybe some months or so, and possibly in the 2023 budget, which will soon be presented. So my approach to this is that the government needs to shift a bit And ASUU also needs to shift a bit in the interest of the educational system. That is one. Secondly, we should see this struggle as an ongoing struggle. From all indications, we cannot solve this problem at one go. It has to be a continuous thing. Thirdly, I'm aware that ASUU has presented proposals on how to finance university education. That proposal is not yet in public domain. If you can push for a much greater financial autonomy for the universities, they can activate some of those proposals on how to generate revenue internally and to be able to, meet their financial obligations in addition to whatever the budget can provide. Because from all indications, it's not likely that we can effectively fund the university education from the budgetary process. We need to step out of the budgetary process and give the universities the autonomy to bring in their innovation, their creativity in generating more revenue in order to sustain the system. I also think that the money that is realized from the sale of JAMB funds, those monies are also significant in a way. Those monies should go directly to the universities. It's not the kind of money you throw into the federation account. It should go directly to the universities. Then we also need to look at how sustainable the current university fees are. I know that we are grappling with a whole lot of issues of poverty, affordability, and all of that on the part of the parents. I quite understand that. But whether we can sustain the university system with undergraduates paying about 30,000 per annum to sustain that kind of system and expect to have quality education is something that we need to interrogate. I'm not advocating that we should remove the entire subsidy completely, but we need to revisit the model. Possibly, we could identify those who don't have.
There seems to be having some frames there. Alaji Yabagisani, the federal government says it can only afford a 23.5% salary increase for lecturers of all categories except for professors. Now, for those who think that if there is any adjustment in wages of workers at any level, there might be impact. But if you look at it, the differential in the VAT, increase in the VAT, was what was also used by the federal government in meeting the demands of the increment of the minimum wage. You heard what Mr. Muda Yusuf said. Are there any other ways? Because beyond the temporary, beyond now, is also finding a lasting solution so that another government does not come and we still continue in the same agitation about ASUU. I personally believe that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, there should be any kind of agitation from university lecturers whatsoever. What, in your own view, is a way by which the federal government can have a lasting solution, especially when it comes to the wages of lecturers?
Well, the federal government must become more organized and then to be more honest in handling our resources, in terms of fighting corruption, because it has the bottom of all what we're talking about. You said, can you imagine that the major source of income, for funding our budget is borrowing? The 2023 budget, we're going to borrow about 11-point-something trillion, naira, to add to what we already have. So the issue now is that government must be able to think out of the box. They were talking about telecommunication tax or something like that. Yeah. If this government is seen by people as a responsible government that will not steal their money, as in the manner it's been stolen today, I'm sure Nigerians will be able to accept such tax if you now say we are going to pay, we're increasing this because telecommunication is those that can really afford it, by and large. It's something that people will not mind, party. And even the operators will be ready to say, okay, look at petroleum industry. There is a PPT, petroleum profit tax, which you pay. There's a 2% that we now pay for the education, to fund the education. But the issue now is that Nigerians may not like to accept, any increase in any form. But, like Mudashiru was saying, we must be able to understand that, unfortunately, we are at the precipice. And all of us as Nigerians have it as our responsibility to ensure that we rescue this country and help government, and so that the next government, ADP government, by the grace of God, will come and solve most of these problems. Because that's why we have book as our symbol, not for anything. We realize education must be funded in a way that you can now revitalize all your other sectors of the country.
We're due for a break.
I believe...
Just for a moment. We're due for a break. Mr. Yusuf is back. But just in about 30 seconds, I know you had some education, tertiary education, outside of this country. All of this also goes into the ownership of these universities, whether or not the federal government can further bear the burden of funding and managing these universities. In other climes, what is applicable? How do the public universities, how are they funded? How are they being run? And run effectively?
They are run like any private organization, where they have investments, they have shares, they have so much, in the businesses and what have you. I remember when I was in Columbia University, we even had to go on strike to now force our university to divest from companies which were doing business in South Africa at that point in time. Some of us, I remember, we went on strike in New York. So the issue now is that universities in Nigeria must also start thinking, like Mudashiru was saying, that there are some ideas which universities have of how to run universities, not to entirely depend on
maybe one major lesson out of this strike
allocation.
Because sometimes when you're facing challenge, you also need to introspect. Maybe it's a good opportunity to really look at the general structure of the universities and restructure things. I mean, we talk about restructuring Nigeria, but maybe there is a need for a restructuring of the universities.
The restructuring, government can make it a sort of policy, because in every country you have sour and sweet policy. You can identify sectors that are thriving in spite of the problems we're talking about in the economy, like telecommunication sector. They can be asked to look into how they can invest in these universities and even take ownership of the universities, because and then also ensuring that you do not again put too much pressure on the nationals. I mean, the poor people that children are in this schools. But something must happen. To divest, to move
something fundamental must happen.
To move it away from the government.
Let's take a break, and we will return. The Minister of Education has said today that over the last 2 weeks, he's not been able to have good sleep because of these issues. So is a lot of parents also who have not had good sleep because their children are at home, because the classrooms are being shut because of the ASUU strike. And so we're talking about solutions and solutions. Will this committee be able to find a lasting solution? And this funding issue, how can it be resolved? We continue the conversation after this break. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Brain drain, infrastructure issue, developmental issues in our education sector has become a major problem. And the reasons given by university lecturers for them down to tooling and asking the federal government to rise to the occasion, it's been over 200 days. Now, the Minister of Education is saying, look, over the last few weeks, that he's taking charge of the negotiation and resolving the issue over the strike of the university lecturers. He's not really had good sleep. Let me allow you to listen to him.
For me, the past 2 weeks have been a very dark period of personal anguish and internal turmoil. I used to see myself that in a climate of frankness and with mutual goodwill, it will fall to my lot to bring an end to the incessant strikes in the education sector. This so far has not proved possible, or at least not as easy, or as quickly, or as straightforward as I think or as I used to think, because I know there was a time I boasted that I will be able to stop the strike in 2017. And this was in tandem with the unions, they agreed. Unfortunately, this has not happened. Distinguished Chairman, Vice Chancellors, I call you today not to share with you my anguish, but to share with you the details of what we have done and what remains to be done.
Well, then you heard him. Now, there is a committee to look into this matter, and that's why we have Alhaji Yabaji Sani, the presidential candidate of the ADP and the chair of the Conference of the Political Parties in Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And from a finance and economic point of view, Mr. Muda Yusuf, former director, DG of the SCCI, has been speaking with us and giving us insight into all of these issues. Now, I was going to ask you a question earlier before the break in the connection, and it's about the intervention or the thinking of the committee that was set up by the federal government to look at how they can meet up with the obligation should there be an increase in the minimum wage. There was an increase in the minimum wage. The VAT increase also was allowed the federal government to be able to meet up that obligation. Now, you have mentioned a few means by which the federal government can, you mentioned JAM form fees and all of that to go straight into funding the universities. But the question here is, how do you level and even things up? If the university lecturers are talking now, it might be the turn of the medical workers tomorrow. It might be some other unions next tomorrow. How do we even things up so that when this decision is made, it doesn't unsettle the system?
Well, there is no way all the agencies or departments of government or institutions of government can earn the same salary. Even as we speak, there are some MDAs whose salaries are almost 200 or 300% higher than some others. So we cannot put all of them in the same basket. That's not to diminish the importance of any group of employees, but that is the reality. All of them cannot be in the same basket. There are issues of negotiation, there are issues of the technical capacity, there are issues of the availability of skills. All of these things have a way of influencing wages. So that is one. Secondly, the government was talking about no work, no pay. And the ASUU has said repeatedly that even when they go back to work, they have to clear the arrears of the work that has not been done. So that means that they are still going to work backwards to be able to, push the curriculum up to date. So they're still going to invest a lot of time. And just as Alhaji said in the studio, there are some activities that are also ongoing, research and all of that. So I don't want the minister or the government to be too rigid on this issue of no work, no pay. That logic does not apply strictly in this.
Mr. Yusuf, the response of the lecturers was, if you are saying that there is no work, no pay, so all of the missed courses and classes, they are also not going to revisit. That's a direct response from the lecturers. Perhaps we see the likes of Professor Musoli Jubre, the likes of Professor Briggs, Professor Luobafemi, and the likes that are on that same committee. These people are being in their university system, representative of the federal government also, the pro-chancellors, the vice-chancellors, and all of that. But in all of this is the Jonathan administration had an agreement with ASUU. This is what has lingered, that's caused the problem, because the federal government of the day cannot meet up with the obligation. We're looking at a permanent solution. What do you see as a permanent solution? Is it a form of restructuring of the university system in some ways?
Well, restructuring of the university system, that may be part of the solution. Then giving greater financial autonomy to the universities, that will also help. Because just as I said, they also have a basket of ideas on how to generate revenue to run their universities. So if we give a much bigger scope of autonomy financially to the universities, they'll be able to do a lot more in terms of ensuring the sustainability of the university system. And just as I said, we also need to revisit the issue of the tuition fees. I mean, 30,000 naira per annum, I don't know how far that can go. You know, that's less than $50 a year. If you want quality, I'm not saying that it should be as expensive as what you have in private universities, but at least there has to be a shift. Because we need to be realistic in all of this. And all this experience is affecting the economy in a very big way. We are talking of human capital development. Which country grows, which country advances without quality human capital? So that is key. If you look at
Mr. Yusuf, could there be a possibility of an increase in the fees and the tuition fees to be paid by students? Because some people will argue and say, look, you cannot, like you've said, 30,000 naira per annum for university education. We see in some parts of America and the rest and the West, where students will go and take education loan, and when they get a job, they start paying back, and the government gives them a long time to be able to pay. But the question they will ask is, where are the jobs? Even when you finish university, there are no jobs. Where do we go from here?
No, there can be a model. This things has to be a bit selective. It is not all the undergraduates it's not all the undergraduates that cannot afford it. What we are having now is a sweeping subsidy across, but just like we are grappling with the fuel subsidy problem. If we can do something, make it like a bursary something or scholarship or something, because we have to be creative in this matter. We have to be creative. I mean, if you are paying 30,000 for a whole year.
One can introduce some kind of tax breaks, for organizations that can really invest in education because they have a lot of money that can invest in education. And then government can now give tax breaks to those organizations so that there will be some kind of discipline in the management of the market. Because when you see negotiation lingering on for so long, there is some kind of insincerity, either on the two parts or on one part of the parties who are negotiating. But the solution to this is that we must think out of the box. We must bring in the private sector initiative so that and government can, like I said, instead of throwing money into the education, if they feel that maybe 1.1 trillion naira that management of university were asking for, that it will not be utilized for the purpose, then you can introduce private sector initiative. Let's force them to take up some universities that will be part of their management. The contribution to the development of the economy is done, in some places. So I think, and look at also the first subsidy budget, about 6 trillion naira they were asking for. So Nigerians will not really will not mind, to an extent. If you say, well, because of this, education issue, we are increasing, reducing the subsidy, and then the money will be plowed into education sector as an emergency kind of, approach, to solving this issue. People are passionate about education. People know, but I'm not in any way supporting an idea of increasing the fees that must be paid by the students. In the circumstances we are in today, parents have had it enough. I mean, people cannot even eat. And education must be supported. Government must take up the responsibility of ensuring, coming up with some other ways by which education can be funded, like tax breaks for some of these organizations that can do it, reduce the amount of subsidies on fuel. We can't be a slave to our own laws. Like if you said, because you pass PIA and it says until after this administration has gone, that you can now, reduce the subsidy. That doesn't hold water, because here we have an emergency that you didn't think, may be as problematic as it is today.
So if there's going to be a jack up in the tuition fees in university, you think there will be an outcry from the Nigerian people?
Definitely, there will be. Why not look at the subsidy that the money throwing at some corruption? That everybody knows is a corruption something. They can reduce it. The subsidy is not going to Nigerians. Education will go to Nigerians. Reduce the subsidy, and then see what will happen. When you talk about this petroleum price, who's paying even the price that government says they should pay? People in the rural areas they don't even see petrol to buy at that price. They pay maybe 3 times or even more than that, for them to buy fuel. And they said there will be inflationary, effect. Believe me, it's just in our imagination. I know that government can say we are reducing this subsidy to invest in education immediately, because this is an immediate problem that we have. Nigerians will understand, I'm telling you, and they will take it.
Let's take another break, and when we come back, we'll bring back Mr. Muda Yusuf into the conversation, and there are a few issues that we need to touch before we close the program. Stay with me, everyone. We'll be right back.
I, Senator Hope Uzodimma, Governor of Imo State and Coordinator APC Southeast Presidential Council, cordially invite the underlisted persons to a crucial meeting of our great party. Those invited are all APC's governors in the Southeast, all members of the National Working Committee from the Southeast, all state chairmen of the party, all state secretaries, all governorship candidates, all senatorial candidates, all House of Representatives candidates, all House of Assembly candidates, all honorable ministers, all chairmen and members of federal boards and commissions, all serving and former members of the National Assembly, all former governors of APC, all former chairmen and members of federal boards and commissions still in APC, all APC stakeholders. Date, Thursday, September 8, 2022. Venue, Rockview Hotel, Owerri. Time, 12 noon prompt. Senator Hope Uzodimma, Governor of Imo State and Coordinator, APC Southeast Presidential Council.
Thank you so much, everyone. Our concluding moment on the program now, Mr. Muda Yusuf. In all of the conversation, what perhaps comes out to you? We are not able to meet the quota as prescribed by the United Nations for budgeting on education, and I'm not sure we are even able to meet in several other areas of human capital development. Give us your view of what comes out to you. In the present state of education, there is the issue of the brain drain. Not only university lecturers wanting to go outside of the country to apply their trade or to lecture there, also a lot of Nigerians also are going in droves outside of the country, even to Benin Republic and Niger Republic, to seek to further their education.
Well, in addition to what I've said, there is a need to also commit to budgetary reforms. We need to reform our budget. The allocation mechanism or methodologies is something that needs to be further interrogated. We need to look at, because there are some budget heads that are disproportionately too high. For instance, like this social investment ministry, humanitarian affairs, sometimes if you look at the kind of figures that are budgeted for those things, I think is something that we need to review. We have things like what is called service-wide votes in the budget. Those allocations are also huge, So there is need also to review the budgetary process and reform the budget itself, so that sectors like education, like defense, like health can get much better deal than what they are having now. But let me emphasize once again that there is no way we can ensure quality university education if the university system is dependent entirely on the budget. This thing will continue to recur if we don't give the universities a bigger financial autonomy to bring on board their innovation and creativity in terms of revenue generation. That is one. Secondly, I already talked about this fuel subsidy issue. I mean, committing almost 6 trillion to fuel subsidy. I mean, it's scandalous. And this subsidy problem is one of the challenges we have in our fiscal space. So we need to deepen engagements on this fuel subsidy thing and gradually exit from it so that we can better support sectors like education. ASUU is a very strong member of the NLC. So between ASUU and the leadership of NLC, there can be some conversation on how to swap these things and get the government to move some resources from the fuel subsidies to education. Just as Alhaji said there in the studio. These are some of the things that you can begin to look at. But again, both sides need to shift in this negotiation process. Then the government needs to suspend this whole idea of no work, no pay. It doesn't apply to the kind of engagement that we are faced with at the moment. It doesn't apply at all.
Alhaji Yabajisani, your final thought on the program tonight.
Well, my final thought is that government must appear to be committed to really moving this country forward. Education is one of the fundamental that you must get right if you really want your country to progress. So that's why I'm like Chief Muda Yusuf has said that subsidy, believe you me, is not something that we cannot address, because we all know it's corruption that is eating almost, if you like, about 90% of what we call subsidies into corruption. And like he says, there's nothing wrong. ASUU and NLC that has been telling government that they are not going to allow them to increase it. They can engage and then come up with a formula that, okay, take gradually, out, and let us see. Like, I mean, this president, President Muhammadu Buhari, was the chairman of PTF. PTF was an extraordinary, measure to address certain dislocations in the economic sector at that point in time, and the same thing can be done. So which means these are things you do as an extraordinary steps to address some emergency situation that if you don't take care of it, it will upset the whole system and will create more problems for you. So my suggestion to the government is to perhaps bring these two unions together. Let us see how we can move this thing forward by taking money that is today, if they get an agreement amongst the two. All this, how much are they talking about? 1.1 trillion. We are saying we're going to throw about 6 trillion into corruption. So why not look at that direction? Why not also look at way by which you can attract the private sector by way of having investment in the education sector, like it's done all over the world.
All right.
So that's
Thanks so much, Alhaji Yabajisani, for your time tonight. I really appreciate it, and as well as Mr. Muda Yusuf. Unfortunately, Professor Nyase, we couldn't bring him on because of bad connection on that side. Thank you so much indeed, gentlemen, for coming tonight.
Thank you, sir.
We're hoping that this matter will be resolved as fast as the federal government and as we can. But that's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye-bye.